Hello, guys. It's Shane Davis here. I have worked in the comic industry for 20 years and have always kind of known Diamond through distribution. Have also known Diamond when I was just collecting comics when I was 13 years old, and I first discovered a local comic shop. Some of my first comics I ever bought were kind of from a store, like a grocery store, 7-Eleven or something like that. And then I discovered my local comic shop and then discovered the giant Diamond catalog. Looks like a phone book. The first time you see it, you're amazed that there's even this much comics in the world ordered every month. And as a kid, you're just like, wow. As an adult, when you're spending your money and not your parents' money, you're like, oh, geez, how do I pick? So, what's interesting here is there's been big news this last week talking about Marvel leaving Diamond. What does that mean? I did another video on that talking about what is Penguin to the comic book publishing atmosphere, basically what they have been doing in comics, and you can go check out that video. On that note, before I get into this, please look down below, hit that subscribe button, share the video if you will, leave me a comment. All right, so what I want to talk about in this video is what this means for creator-owned stuff. Some of these companies aren't exactly 100% creator-owned. Of course, everybody knows Image Comics is the best creator-owned deal out there. You own all of it. They take a fee for production cost in the catalog, which this relates to Diamond. And then you get everything else. Now, there's other creator-owned sort of deals, co-op deals with publishers like Boom and IDW, and historically things like Top Shelf, Dark Horse. We'll get into those in a little bit. One thing I want to talk about in general is when you get down to things like Boom, IDW, and Dark Horse, you'll notice that they work in this weird manner where they're always looking for licenses to fluff out and counterbalance their creator-owned stuff they do. When you look back at Dark Horse, you know, they had Terminator, they had RoboCop, they had Aliens and Predator and Star Wars, and they lost a bunch of money in the 90s on Planet of the Apes. But they were chasing sci-fi licenses like that to do comic books off of, but they were also doing things like Hellboy and Sin City and things like that at the same time. And some other things like, it wasn't X-Men, I think it was Next-Men, I think, with John Byrne, different things. So, of course, they were more into the license and less creator-owned, unless you were somebody special like Frank Miller and Mike Mignola. And then we've seen this model again with Boom and IDW, where they'll do things like Transformers and stuff like that, but then also try to do things like Lock and Key and different creator-owned things. Why I bring this up is, if we go back when DC left Diamond, it was point blank, they lost 1/3 of their business. That was a big chunk of business to lose. So you have to assume Marvel is another third. So they've lost 2/3 of their business from like roughly like maybe a year and 2 months, a year and a half ago, right? And you go, well, how does a business sustain that? And the truth is they're having to downsize. Money's going to become an issue pretty soon, pretty quick. And a lot of people, I've heard certain people say, well, this is doom and gloom for creator-owned. I've heard certain people say there's opportunity for people to run into Diamond, because there's this idea that if these companies are leaving Diamond, that retailers will order more creator-owned stuff. And I'm here to kind of debunk that in a way. And it's not that I'm not saying it's untrue, but I'm just going to talk realistically from dealing with retailers for 20 plus years, their mindset of things. Okay. First off, retailers, they kind of just order the things they know. They order brands, they order Marvel stuff, they order DC stuff. This stuff has been developed and branded over 80 some years. So it's all, and I'm not saying retailers are lazy, they're not. But the reality is comics are horribly marketed as far as entertainment goes. We really have never developed a way to advertise our product properly. The internet, we kind of took hold on the internet, but then it just gets lost. And what I mean it gets lost is if you go look up like a very popular character, you'll see tons of DeviantArt stuff and art pages of that character everywhere. It's just uncontrollable. And this kind of causes the comic market to do these radical things to turn heads and snap heads around at radical changes in costumes and deaths of characters or identity politics or things like that's being forced on these characters. So the comic shop, where I'm going with this is, as far as it's related to creator-owned stuff, this is where you see, and it's kind of a fad, if so-and-so's writing Batman and that's the top selling book, the retailers automatically order their creator-owned book that they do following after that, which any smart creator would do that, right? Get that Netflix deal, make that cheddar if you can while you're making Batman books. So being a Batman writer, so to speak, all of a sudden is a shot in the arm for your creator-owned property. And there's really nothing against that, but this goes back to where I'm going with this is retailers don't really have time to read every comic book. Okay. When I worked at Image Comics, I was able to reach out to a list of retailers. And surprisingly, and this is obviously in healthier times, there was not as many retailers in North America as you would hope. And if you go to talk to them, dude, they have a sea of stuff they're trying to figure out what to order. And if 1/3 of what they have to order is creator owned, each book for number's sakes, each creator-owned book is its own individual brand. So they can't go invest a lot of time. They don't have the time to invest thought and time and energy and take the risk to see if a book works or not. And what I found when I worked on a creator-owned book is my book would sell really well in some comic shops and not well in others. And especially when I went to talk to them. Now, some retailers pushed it, some retailers didn't. And the truth of it is, if a customer said, why should I buy this? And they say, well, because so-and-so did it. That's not really a great advertisement for my product. You really would need to read that book and understand that book to sell that book. Now, that's what's interesting about creator-owned stuff. And when I've dealt with other creators, is creator-owned books can sell a certain way in this shop in this area and a different way in another. So it's really inconsistent. And there's a lot of factors to that. But I think it all boils down to the shop owner's interest in selling that book. And again, where all this goes, what does this mean for creator-owned? Okay, Diamond in the shape they are with losing both DC and Marvel. Of course, money and factors, I'm not going to pretend to understand that, but I assume, like, let's pretend it's a circus tent. They lost one pole, then they lost another pole, and then the one pole that's there, which is creator-owned, is left holding this up, but it may not be the strongest pole. It's the one pole holding the tent up right now. The idea is the weight's consolidating onto that one pole because the other two have left. And that's very true, because in the end, Diamond still has to make money. Their infrastructure is set up at a certain type of business model, which has radically changed right now. Nobody's really talking about that part. I mean, we kind of are, but we're kind of not. So as far as creator-owned goes, the retailer's attention is everywhere else but the Diamond catalog right now. They're looking over at where Marvel's going. They're looking over at DC's going. And historically, profits from Marvel and DC books kind of have funneled back into what I would call investing in the creator-owned. One example is what I just said with being a Batman writer and doing a creator-owned book. Right? Some of their money is getting tied up in your creator-owned thing. But in the 90s, when the Image guys were selling so much books at Marvel and DC, retailers were taking risk on things like Jeff Smith's Bone and putting money into that because they were making so much extra money selling multiple copies of X-Men #1 and Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man #1 and things like that, and X-Force #1, that they knew let's try to order some other stuff here and sell. And Bone was kind of a hit in the 90s, had completely different than what else was going on around it, was a big breakout hit. It takes money to take those creator-owned risks. Okay, like in the case of Bone, retailers were taking profits from things they were making money hand over fist, selling multiple copies of, and investing in that. And going forward in the future, it's like saying, if the industry's not producing that type of money to reinvest in creator-owned, then what are they supposed to do? Take out a bank loan? Money and time is usually, some people think they're two in the same. In the comic industry, they're kind of different. People only have so much time to read things and so much bandwidth And the creator-owned market is very competitive to get attention. With DC and Marvel being outside of the Diamond catalog, the attention to look inside that catalog is less at every comic shop. I hate to say that, but that's the truth. Now they're looking at 3 different catalogs in 3 different places, whereas all this was consolidated, where they only had to flip a few more pages and they were in that weird green section of the random stuff. There was times like this where there was a slow month at DC, retailers would have to go in heavy on a big creator's image book, number one, because they had to sell something that month. Okay, we saw this with when right before Marvel launched the all new, all different line. There were certain image books that had an uptick in sales. So right now, I feel like there's going to be more of a pressure for brands to enter Diamond. And what I mean by that is if you look at things like Dark Horse and IDW and things like that, they need more things like Transformers or My Little Pony or Power Rangers, anything like that that has a household recognizable name, something that's going to drag the retailer into that catalog that they can sell and put in their store, that they feel has like an outside reach, rather than them trying to hand sell 200 creator-owned books every month. And that's the problem that you have to understand the retailer is going to come up with pretty soon, is they're going to look at the Diamond catalog as a bunch of creator-owned books that they have to hand sell, whereas they think Marvel and DC, they have gimmicks, they have new characters, they have the movies, they have the TV shows. The idea is that outside advertising force is already kind of helping them sell some of those books. And that's kind of an illusion, but it's a mindset that some retailers have. And what's interesting with the more pressure on these companies to bring in brands into the Diamond catalog now that all these brands have left, is if you look at Dark Horse invested so much time and energy into the Star Wars comics, into the Alien comics, and into the Predator comics. And all 3 of those franchises, they lost to Disney/Marvel. Now, all those properties are, from what I can tell, if they get made into comics, they're going to Penguin. So Penguin didn't just get Marvel, Penguin got Star Wars, Penguin got Aliens, Penguin got Predator. This is what's interesting with anybody trying to do licensed deals right now in the Diamond catalog. Any type of time and money you're putting into that could be time and energy that's taken away from you one day. Another thing I want to touch on is advertising and marketing of creator-owned books, how hard it is, how difficult it is, because getting around on news sites doesn't necessarily mean your book's going to sell. I feel like with some of these companies, because of these risks, you're going to see them try to do crowdfunding, kind of like Boom has done. And with Berserker, even though Keanu was a big marketing factor in there, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these independent companies are going to have to look at crowdfund and then print. And somebody would argue that maybe that's hurting the comic shops, and actually may think some comic retailers have less of incentive to even order it to begin with if they're competing against a crowdfunding model. Historically, with Image Comics, they actually have kind of an issue with crowdfunding. It's kind of like an unspoken thing. If you deal with them and they're going to greenlight your book, you'll come across it. And I'll point to an example of this, and that would be the Snyder's or Nocturnal. I'm not sure he switched the names on it. But if you look at that book, you'll notice it's a black and white book that you're getting in the crowdfunding area. Whereas if you go comic shop, it's a color printed book. And they got around this Image doesn't like crowdfunding thing by kind of arguably offering 2 different products. So it's going to be interesting to see, with creators needing to make a certain amount of money to make these books even viably possible, and they need to sell a certain amount. How is crowdfunding with these smaller publishers? Because you have to understand, these smaller publishers are going to want to make retailers happy. They're not. So the idea of, do you expect me to order your book and it's up on Kickstarter and it's up on Indiegogo? This may become more and more of a problem for somebody who's not Keanu Reeves. Okay, to be honest, to be frank, this could be a huge issue. And also, like, I want to point out that a lot of the rock star writers that used to work on these huge books like Spider-Man or Avengers or Batman, and then did a creator-owned book, they're not in those same shoes anymore. Now, I also want to end this on one interesting note, that talking about how times have changed. Vertigo in the I guess 90s, mid 90s, late 90s, 2000s, a big part of Vertigo was trying to keep creator-owned properties from going everywhere, from going to Image, from going to, before Image had its second boom. Image was just a lot of creators treated Image Comics as a way to get published, so then you could work at Marvel and DC. And a lot of creators were very happy to sign these Vertigo deals that a lot of people are trying to get back today. And what was interesting with Paul Levitz is Vertigo was a way to keep creators from not going too far on their own. And it's interesting that the industry has been kind of groomed in a way with creatives coming up and whatnot to focus all their energy in Marvel and DC and not creator-owned. It's also interesting because it's really hard to build a career in creator-owned without Marvel and DC, without their marketing and branding you as a talent for retail confidence. It is a thing because you have to understand, for people that don't buy comics and you're not a retailer, if you're coming across this video, you have to understand, when you walk into a comic shop, you were not the initial customer that retailer was. If they can't convince the retailer to stock your book, you will never have an option to find that book in your local comic shop. So you're like the second customer technically. So these are interesting issues, especially when you understand that mechanism, and then you look at the Diamond catalog without a Marvel section, without a DC section, and you really scratch your head on this. How is this going to work? How are we going to draw people to the Diamond catalog now? And the other question I want to end on, and time will tell, will we see more publishers trying to leave the Diamond catalog, which could be absolutely the end of Diamond altogether right now if anybody else left. And there's a lot of incentive for people to leave because, again, this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of it, and people read the energy of Marvel and DC pushing onto creator-owned is if you have a creator-owned book, you do want to be next to Marvel and DC in a weird way when it comes to retailers. You don't want to make it harder for them to come across your product, period, especially when they're doing FOCs, final order cutoff, right before the end of the day. They need to just quickly get to your code to order your book. And you hope you strike at the right time when the retailer either has extra cash or there's not enough product at Marvel and DC that month and they need to invest in something else, and that you happen to have a good jumping on point. So anyways, guys, that's just some random thoughts I have as a comic creator who have dealt with retailers, who have dealt with publishers, who have dealt with Diamond. And I just wanted to touch on that. I also wanted to say thank you guys for backing Starlight Cat's Merlion Rising creator-owned book up on Indiegogo right now. Little Girl, Big Adventures in Space. Can't say enough good things about this book. Probably one of the best creator-owned books that you can buy this year. So definitely go check that out. And I will catch you guys with another video. Take care.